So let's go back to preparation for classes.
Harold was extremely dedicated to being very well prepared. The night before his class or classes, he would get out the pertaining books to his lecture, and he would go through, he would take notes, and that man could remember dates. Oh my gosh. He maybe didn't remember what he had for dinner last night, but he would remember the dates, and I could always ask him about dates. He sat there many hours preparing for his class very diligently, because when he got to class, he used the slides to talk, and he could talk and talk and talk about a painting, citing interesting little tidbits about the artist's life as well as his input into the painting itself, plus the date, plus what it was like back then. He had all of that in his mind. It was wonderful to see. He was a master at art history. He had his doctorate partly in painting and in art history, and he knew it, but he always wanted to be refreshed because he never wanted to make a mistake.
So when I came to Harold Gregor, I was a photorealistic painter and a surrealistic painter, which I didn't even know what surrealism was at that time. But, he kind of would tease me about being a realist, and he taught me the scumbling method and the slapdash and those sort of things. So that's one. Obviously, color was huge. I love color. I've always loved color. He was very complimentary on my use of color. And one of the things that Harold, I think, taught me was to break me free from just trying to copy things. And I was doing that because I wanted to learn. I wanted to learn to see. I wanted to see if I could replicate what I was seeing. I wanted to understand how color and light work together to create form. But Harold knew I had something more inside of me. So, one time he said, "Why don't you take a picture and save yourself a lot of time?" And so I started investigating, and I don't know whether he taught me this language or whether it's something I picked up along the way, but I created a visual vocabulary with my artwork that I still use today.
Well, Harold Gregor was this figure, figure that would, go, you just knew about him. His reputation preceded him. So before I even saw him, in person, you knew about him. So looking at him, in the hallways and just seeing his presence and the attention he brought wherever he stood. Everyone just sat up a little straighter. Everyone just sat up a little straighter, whether outwardly or inside. It's like, okay, got to be in attention here. Harold's here. And
it was interesting when I could learn from him from technique as well as history. Because of all the history classes I took under Dr. Gregor, I got a good understanding of the whys of what we do with art, and from some of the intentions of making art during certain periods. And then when we study technique, of course, when you take watercolors with this class, you really understand watercolors. I also took his color theory class too, so you understand how to color dynamics and learning how certain masters accomplish the things they do with their mediums. So we studied John Marin and Whistler with the watercolors and understanding color. It really gave me a lot of insight on what it was I was trying to do with art. And as I learned the whys of what we do. And he was one of the best professors when it came to helping you, I guess, criticizing your work. He was always known for our the weeks that we had, critiques. So critiques was always, you line your work up out in the hallway. The entire class would participate. You take a stroll down the hall, and he would critique, individuals. And he was very transparent in his feedback. So you had to have some very thick skin to be able to manage, those critiques. And so it was always a challenge to participate in the critiques, because you want to meet the expectations, of Dr. Gregor, as well as exceed those expectations. So my goal was always to, of course, meet the expectations, but then at some point you want to exceed them. And the only way you know you're exceeding his expectations is you don't hear feedback. He would just say, "You got it."
So the reason I came to ISU was because I heard there was a teacher there who taught about color. And that turned out to be Harold Gregor. And it was well worth it. I learned a lot about color theory, and I was also a printmaker, and that was Ray George. I remember I was an older student, and I had a companion older student, Davida Schulman, and the two of us were not intimidated. He had horrible puns, and so we would retaliate with horrible puns. But I think the younger students were scared of Harold. But we really enjoyed the banter, the back and forth banter, and I really liked the color theory, and I really got a lot out of that class. In fact, I still use so much of that theory in my teaching.
I just remember Harold Gregor, all of them actually. The Harold Boyd, Ron Jackson, Ray George, Ken Holder, especially Harold Gregor, remembering their approach and our long conversations that we had about the process of making art when we were students, and their process, and reflecting very honestly about what you're making, and trying to avoid those hazards of imitation, authentically about myself, and a statement, an honest statement, and to make the painting the best that I am able to make it with the skills that I have. And that's something that he taught.
I have general memories of a lot of the critiques I got from Ron Jackson and Ken Holder and Harold Boyd, and they would have ways of steering you gently in certain directions. So I have more general ideas about what those critiques were like. I have really specific memories about Harold Gregor's critiques, and I look back on them now fondly. This is probably a common theme that you hear. I look on them more fondly now maybe than at the moment, but that's great, because it's obvious to me now that the point was to break certain ideas. You enter into grad school in this interesting place where you already know enough stuff to make you dangerous, but not enough to necessarily be able to resolve an artwork in a decent way, or it's going to be a lot of luck of the draw. And you've developed habits and ideas that you may not want to carry with you for the rest of your professional life, but you got them. And so it seems like certainly one of the duties of a professor would be to kind of break you of some of those bad habits that you've already, and they might have different opinions of what some of those bad habits are. What's one man's bad habit is what's one man's vice is another man's pleasure. So I don't know, but in that case, I think it was about drawing, and drawing is such a fundamental activity, And it's what a lot of painters will base, and especially if they're doing representational work, will base a lot of their painterly moves on what happens in that fundamental moment of doing drawings. And he took something that had to do with that, just that root basic idea of how you even hold a pencil or how you make, you know, that drawing motion with your hand, that just obliterated the thing that I thought I was good at with just a simple comment. This wasn't even part of like a major critique. And wow, you know, so that's all I could think about, right? For the next, I couldn't do a drawing after that. Because every time I'd do the thing, then I'd go, oh, I'm doing the thing. And then I'd be second guessing it. And so now I look back on that, and I still, when I do drawings, I think about that little moment. But I think I'm confident that that was a really pivotal moment, because it kind of broke me out of a kind of a routine that was a crutch that I would hold on to.
He offered a challenge to them. Unless he felt that they really were on the right path, he's tried to get them out of doing their same thing they did over and over again. He says, you're never going to learn. You've got to try and do something different and see what happens.
I think, you know, if I hadn't had him for art history, I wouldn't have had as good a background for teaching art that I ended up having. And I had him for modern art. And I think one of the things that he, as well as other instructors, sort of gave me a grounding in was kind of the autonomy of a painting, and sort of moved me beyond the idea that I was, you know, just trying to report what I saw. And after that, my paintings became more abstract, I think.
The whole department was really strong at ISU, and one of my favorite classes, without a doubt, was Harold Gregor's classes in arts history. Just really, really informative. I enjoyed so much the way Harold would present work with an incredible collection of slides, and just really be able to talk very objectively about new work, and also be able to talk about it very personally and how he kind of gauged that work, or information about that artist that we're not going to see in a book or something. He was really had such a broad understanding of all of it. And so there were two classes that he taught, and one was like a previous time that led up to the true modern art movement, maybe in the 40s and 50s in our country, especially New York City. And then the earlier work, like around the turn of the century and on, which was just laid the groundwork for understanding so many things. Without a doubt that in and of itself, that those two classes just informed me in a way that I don't think I could have ever gotten the same kind of response by reading it in a book or seeing it on a program or something. That's when I really had not known Harold in a way of working with him as a professor in involving my work and having critiques with him at that point in time, because that had not yet occurred.
So I started when, what was I, 28 then, in 68, and I went until 70 or 82. I got a BS, MS, and an MFA, always working with Harold. And just, he was I thought, a very demanding professor, and people are shocked when they say, well, I'm a little afraid of him, you know. And, you know, Tori Follier, you know, she dealt with Harold's work, and she was just shocked that Harold might be demanding and stern even. And because outside, you know, when you just know him as a person, he's a wonderful, warm, just a great guy. But boy, in the classroom, he had standards. I remember one time he was looking at my work, and I had a painting, and he liked it. He couldn't find too much to say about it. So the first thing he did is he flipped it around and said, okay, if you take this to a gallery, this has to look professional, and everything has to be done perfectly. And so that was one of the things he stressed, that, you know, front, back, it had to look like a pro job. And, you know, those were the kind of standards that if you were serious about being a painter and trying to make it in the real art world, you really should know those things.
And I also felt that he represented landscape painting so much that he came with, it wasn't just him entering the room, it was him and the school of landscape painting that he represented entering into your studio and stuff. And I guess, and at that time, landscape painting just barely even felt like a genre to me that I was interested in, and that has since changed. But at the time, it was more about his attention to color. And I think that was my connection to him, wasn't so much about genre, but it was about color. And I was intimidated by color too. I was intimidated by Gregor, and I was intimidated by color. And they went hand in hand at ISU. And I was looking at people like Rembrandt and Caravaggio, people that had kicked out color a long time ago for me. And so that was also challenging to kind of go, okay, I'll open myself up to these ideas about color, even though I have my own reasons for not really worrying about that. It's all going to be about value and stuff. And so that was him kicking open a door in those color theory classes as well.
You know, this is why I selected him for my MFA chair. I remember him going around and looking at everybody's work. And he was extremely direct about what was working and what wasn't working. And he was very articulate about that. He had such a breadth of art historical knowledge at his fingertips at all times that his feedback was so credible. You know, he didn't just say what he thought about your work, but he said why he thought it. And I'll never forget this person who had painted the American flag in their piece. And this is what I was just telling my husband. And he just didn't understand the iconic nature of when you put a flag in there and what that might mean in your work. And, you know, it really evolved into a very interesting critique and discussion about putting that kind of subject matter in your work. For me particularly, I was really interested in trying to work abstractly. And, you know, even though he was a landscape artist, you know, he had such an integral part in color theory, and all the color theory that he imparted on me, Helen Frankenthaler, all of that it really elevated my art. He also made a suggestion for my MFA internship that I never knew about. And he suggested that you can go into any of the national art galleries and make a request to see work that maybe wasn't being exhibited, because at the time in the 90s, you couldn't see the color field abstractionists. It wasn't popular at that point. So I took it upon myself, with Harold Gregor's guidance, to go to the National Gallery of Art and ask to see Helen Frankenthaler's work. And they took me in the back because we own it. You know, I would have never known that we own that work and that you can make those kinds of appointments. So just, you know, he really helped me think outside the box. And for sure, every critique, every lecture, you know, all my experiences with him were just astounding in that way. I I didn't get that at undergrad. You know, that wasn't my undergrad experience at all. And so while tough, you know, I appreciated that.
You know, so I also went to the University of Iowa. That's where I got my Master of Fine Arts degree. And that program at that time was, you know, prior to that, it had been, you know, a very highly respected, talked about program, you know, in the country. And so I went there, and yes, they had great facilities, and I loved the campus, and I liked my experience, but I learned a lot more at Illinois State with those people that I had mentioned, you know. And so so coming back here is like coming back home and coming to my origins in a sense.
Guess who came to the gallery more often than anyone else I think that I knew from ISU, let alone professors, but certainly professors. It was Harold Gregor, and he'd come by for somebody from Bloomington. He came by frequently, and then I would see him at the art fairs, always, and I thought that was cool. And so it was, you know, I mean, I had more conversations with him post-graduation probably than I had previously. And then the floodgates were open. It was kind of like, you know, he didn't have to hold a position of I'm the professor, you're the student, maybe. I mean, I might be just projecting or whatever there, but it, and I certainly didn't ever think of him as a peer, but he treated our conversations that way afterwards, and that was really, I was like, I didn't know this guy was so warm, you know? And so my perspective on Harold Gregor just continued to change all the way, you know, and decades after I was down here at school.